Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a lively and really delightful new recording of Geminiani Concerti Grossi, Opus 2 and 3, his most popular groups of Concerti Grossi, which he wrote while he was in England and which were published around 1733, I think. 1732, 33, does it say? 1732. There we go. I wasn't totally off base. These are lovely works. They really are. And we're going to talk about them in a minute. But I first have to tell you my Geminiani story, my Geminiani nightmare. When I was in college at Johns Hopkins, I met this couple who were housing in an Italian, she was a traveler, a tourist, who somehow wound up living with them for a while. She was spending a couple months in the USA touring around. Her name was Gabriella. Anyway, somehow we met. I'm not sure how we met. I think I was dating someone who knew them. Anyway, we met, and they were totally into the Italian Baroque. And they came to my place, and naturally I had this lovely large record collection, and it was in my bedroom, the stereo and all that stuff. And they were in the living room with Gabriella. And I said to them, I've got lots of Italian Baroque music, because I had the whole Philip's Lebendiges Baroque series. Remember that thing? I said, you want to here's something? Let me know what you like. And they said, we would just love to hear Geminiani. We love Geminiani. So I went trucking back to my room. I had no Geminiani. I had Locatelli. I had Tortelli. I had Tortelloni, whatever their other names are. I had all those, the Spumoni and. Anyway, I had lots of Italian Baroque, but no Geminiani. And that freaked me out because I figured I had the whole series. I don't know if there was a Geminiani disc. I was in despair. So I did the only possible thing. I took out a Locatelli disc and I stuck that on and walked into the other room and said, isn't this lovely? I just adore Geminiani too. And they looked at me and said, oh, yes, Geminiani's wonderful. We've heard this. It's Geminiani. I said, oh, yeah, it's Geminiani. It's absolutely terrific. But they got their revenge because it turned out the whole purpose of them coming by was to dump Gabriella on me because she had outstayed her welcome. And she needed a place to stay and didn't want to pay anything. And she seemed, perfectly nice and pleasant. And I was living it was the summer, and I was there in my apartment, and there were 2 empty bedrooms. I was the only one living there. And so I had the space, and so I couldn't say no. I said, all right, so she can stay here for a few days if she needs to. Well, a few days turned into a couple of weeks, and it was driving me absolutely nuts. And finally I told her, I said, you got to go. This is ridiculous. What are you doing here? Go back to Italy. Do something. I don't know what. So she wanted to go to New York City, and I was driving home to Connecticut at the time to see my parents. So I said, I'll take you into the city. That's perfectly fine. So I drove her into New York City. And we were communicating in French, basically. She knew some French and I knew some French. And I dropped her off in New York, and she was very pissed at me because I didn't offer her money or something. I don't know what she wanted. It was totally nuts. And I got rid of Gabriella. But that was my Geminiani horror story. After that, I went post-haste to grab some Geminiani. But the truth of the matter is he's not terribly well recorded. Back then in the early 1980s, there wasn't very much, and frankly, even today, he's not given the recognition he probably deserves. He didn't write tons of music, actually, but these 2 collections of 6 Concerti Grossi each are really quite lovely, and they're very well played by archicembalo on period instruments. However, Geminiani, we have to remember, wrote The Art of the Violin, that our little violin treatise, where he says very clearly and unambiguously that vibrato, which in those days in England was called the close shake, in other words, a shake is a tremolo, but a trill, but a close one that's not a full half step, just a tiny variance in pitch. Anyway, he says that, you use it for, emotional embellishments and things like that where necessary. But he said, otherwise, all it does is improve the tone. And for that reason, you should use it as frequently as possible. Well, the period instrument people have just had a nervous breakdown trying to rationalize that statement. But it seems that he was simply telling us the obvious, which is that's what all people have always done when playing the violin, improving the tone as much as possible using whatever means they need. And vibrato, of course, does just that. When it's not an audible ornament, it's simply a tonal enhancement, a timbral enhancement that makes the tone sound warm and attractive. So you cannot play these unless you use vibrato. Now, I don't know how much vibrato they use or don't use because other than the ornamental kind, you don't hear the purely timbral kind of vibrato. It's practically undetectable. All you hear is nice violin tone or dry, horrible, out of tune, miserable violin tone. And they don't sound miserable. So whatever they're doing, it sounds okay. I mean, it's fine. Now, there are 6 concerti in each of these 2 sets. And, they're short works. They're 4 movements each, except for one. One of them is in 3 movements. But they're in Opus 2. But they're really, really attractive. They're in church sonata form. That's adagio, allegro, basically. Slow, fast. And the tunes are really good, and the rhythms are bouncy, and it's just charming music. None of them is longer than 7.5 minutes, I think. Well, one of them is in the Opus 3 set. They're a little bit bigger. There are a couple that approach 10 minutes. But the cool thing about these 2 sets of Concerti Grossi is that they each contain 4 works. Wow, in minor keys. Lots of minor keys, which means that there's affect. They're not sad. Well, I mean, some of them have like a sort of pathos. There's, the D minor in Opus 2 and, the 2 E minor concerti I really love in Opus 3. But, it's interesting, the predominance of minor keys and the sort of emotionalism of music. It's a little bit unusual for the Baroque period. And Geminiani himself was known as a performer of emotional extravagance. I mean, he really was. So this 2-disc set on Brilliant Classics, which was recorded in 2024 in Italy at the Chiesa di Sant'Antonio Abate. Yeah, there we go. Is really lovely and well worth having. It's a wonderful way to supplement your collection of Italian Baroque music and your Concerti Grossi, though they were written in England in the 1730s. Well, they were probably written before and published after, but Geminiani supervised the publication of these very carefully. So these are the first editions. There were later editions that came out after he had left England in the 1750s. But these are the ones to have. So give them a shot, but don't take in strangers for weeks at a time, even if they're Italian and quite pleasant, basically. I mean, just listen to the music and leave it at that. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.